Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the presidency of James Monroe. Now, on the surface, this time period was often called the era of good feelings. It seemed pretty peaceful. But if you dig just a little deeper, you start to see these huge cracks forming in the brand new United States. And those cracks would set the stage for some major problems down the road.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by asking if this was really an era of good feelings, or was it an era of division? Then we'll look at the country's economic growing pains. After that, we'll explore a big plan to fix those problems called Clay's American System. Then we'll shift gears to America's southern border, and finally we'll wrap up with the super important Monroe Doctrine.
All right, first up, let's tackle that main question. Was this really a time of unity? Well, yeah, a new sense of American pride was definitely growing. But at the exact same time, a totally different kind of loyalty was popping up, not to the country, but to your own specific part of the country.
To really get what's going on here, you need to understand two big competing ideas. On one side, you've got nationalism. That's that feeling of pride in your nation, in being an American. But bubbling up against it was this other powerful force, sectionalism. And the push and pull between these two ideas is what this whole era is about.
So what is this sectionalism thing exactly? Well, it's pretty simple. It's when your loyalty is to your own region, your section of the country, more than to the nation as a whole. You didn't just see yourself as an American anymore. You were a Northerner or a Southerner or a Westerner first. And that, as you'll see, is going to cause some serious disagreements.
And this chart really puts a human face on these different sections. Check out these three really important congressmen. You've got John C. Calhoun from the South. He was all about defending slavery and states' rights. Then there's Daniel Webster from the North. He was against slavery and wanted a strong national government to boost the economy. And finally, Henry Clay, repping the West, who also wanted a strong federal government. You can already see where the fights are going to come from, right? These guys weren't just politicians, they were symbols of a country starting to split apart.
You know, these political fights weren't just happening in a vacuum. They were all tangled up with something everybody understands: money. After the War of 1812, the country was having some major economic growing pains, and these money problems just made the divisions between the regions even worse. So, a huge piece of the problem was that there was no national bank. The first one's charter had expired back in 1811. Without it, all these different state banks started printing their own money, and it was total chaos. It created an unstable money supply and made prices go up. To fix this, Congress finally created a new Bank of the United States in 1816, but that was just one problem solved. Another big challenge was competition from other countries. For a while, when trade with Britain was blocked, American businesses, like the textile mills you see here, had a chance to grow. But as soon as the war ended, super cheap British goods came flooding back into the market. This was a huge threat to the new American factories and all the people who worked in them.
So what could be done? Well, Congress had an idea, something called a protective tariff. Let's break that down. A protective tariff is just a tax on goods that are imported from other countries. The whole goal is to make those foreign goods more expensive. That way, people are more likely to buy the cheaper, American-made stuff. Makes sense, right?
Well, here's where sectionalism really rears its ugly head. This tariff was great for some, but terrible for others. As you can see on this chart, the industrial North absolutely loved it. It protected their factories. But the South and the West, they were mostly farmers, and they hated it. They didn't have a lot of factories, so they had to buy a lot of imported goods. For them, the tariff just made life more expensive, and they felt like the North was getting rich while they were paying the price. This wasn't just about money. It was region against region. Okay, so you have this massive economic fight that's splitting the country apart. Things are not looking good. But right in the middle of all this, Henry Clay, that guy from the West, steps up. He says, "Hey, I've got a plan." He thought he had a way to get all three regions to stop fighting and start working together. He called it the American System, and here's how it was supposed to work in 3 steps. First, you have high tariffs on imported goods. That helps the North's factories. Step 2, since the North is making money, they can now afford to buy more farm goods from the West and cotton from the South. And step 3, all that tax money from the tariff gets used by the government to build new roads and canals. This would connect all the regions and make it easier for everyone to trade with each other. It was supposed to be a win-win-win.
So it sounds like a pretty great plan, doesn't it? So why didn't it happen? Well, you can probably guess the answer by now: sectionalism. The regions just did not trust each other. The South, especially, was really afraid this would make the federal government way too powerful. For them, that fear was a bigger deal than any economic benefit. And so this grand plan to unite America's economy just fell apart.
So while America was having all this internal drama, it was also trying to figure out its borders. And the nation's attention turned south, towards a messy, chaotic neighbor, Spanish-controlled Florida.
The U.S. had a couple of big problems with Spanish Florida. First, Seminole tribes who lived in Florida were crossing the border and raiding towns in Georgia. And second, Florida had become a place where enslaved people from the South could escape to and find freedom. Many of them lived with the Seminoles and became known as Black Seminoles.
So in 1818, the famous general, Andrew Jackson, basically decided to handle it himself. He marched 3,000 soldiers into Florida and just invaded. Now, Spain was in a really tough position. Their empire in Latin America was falling apart, with revolutions everywhere. They just couldn't afford a war with the United States. So they decided it was better to negotiate. And that negotiation led to the Adams-Onís Treaty in 1821. It was a pretty straightforward deal. The United States paid Spain $5 million, and in return, the U.S. got all of Florida. Just like that, America's southern border was much more secure. And that brings us to our final topic, and it might just be the most famous thing to come out of this whole era. We're talking about the Monroe Doctrine, a huge statement that would shape how America dealt with the rest of the world for a long, long time. To understand the Monroe Doctrine, you have to see what was happening all over the Americas. Just look at this map. All these countries in Latin America were fighting for and winning their independence from Spain. Now, the U.S. thought this was great, but President Monroe and his team started to get nervous. They were worried that other European countries like France or Russia might try to take advantage of the chaos and start new colonies for themselves.
So in 1823, Monroe made a big speech and issued his famous declaration. Let's look at the most important line. The American continents are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. The message could not have been clearer. He was basically saying, hey, Europe, stay out of our hemisphere.
This old political cartoon shows the idea perfectly. You've got Uncle Sam, who represents the U.S., holding a big club labeled Monroe Doctrine, and he's using it to keep all those European powers away from the Americas. It shows that the U.S. was basically declaring itself the protector of the whole Western Hemisphere. Okay, let's wrap this all up. As we saw, the era of good feelings was complicated. On the inside, the country was being torn apart by sectionalism, which even wrecked smart plans like the American system. But on the outside, the U.S. was starting to act with a new kind of confidence, using the Monroe Doctrine to tell the old European powers that the Americas were its neighborhood now. And that's our look at the Monroe era. To make sure you got the main ideas, think about these two questions. First, how did that tariff of 1816 just add fuel to the fire of sectionalism? And second, what was the main point, the big message of the Monroe Doctrine? These are the kinds of tensions that would just keep growing for years to come. Thanks for watching.